ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of this remarkable book by Russell Darnley, Seen and Unseen. Thank you for coming out on a Monday night when the weather was looking inclement before, and I know that many of you... Now, I always say start with a dramatic touch. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that many of you are itching to get home to see the grand final decider of Australia's Got Talent, and I hope you've all sent your SMSs for the gentleman from the Torres Strait Islands. But Australia's got a lot of talent, and Russell Darnley here is one of those talents. Why isn't he in the grand final decider tonight? Well, my name... Is he? Oh, good. This is it. My name is David Reeve. I've been teaching Indonesian, Australian studies and Asian studies for over 40 years in TAFE and universities, and my path has often crossed with Russell Darnley. I vividly remember Martina and Russell Darnley sitting on my veranda in Jakarta 30 years ago when they were setting up their wonderful field study education program in Indonesia for Australian students. They had a terrific philosophy, Martina used to say, if you teach about a rice field, teach it in a rice field. If you teach about a market, teach it in a market. They had such enthusiasm. My job was to feed them gin and tonics to sustain their enthusiasm. All that enthusiasm and all that gin. And also when Russell Darnley was pioneering a textbook on Australia for Indonesian schools with Ibu Rohaya, who's here tonight, my colleague. He teaches Australians about Asia and he teaches Indonesians about Australia. He swings both ways. They're the AC/DC of the Australian-Indonesia education system. But in fact, I'd like to speak briefly about Russell and then about the book and its context. But in fact, Russell Darnley and I go back much longer. It was over 50 years ago that we were at Sydney University in the mid-1960s. He was a BMOC, a big man on campus. Joe Cool, too cool for school. I was a dag from the western suburbs. I lived in Fairfield. He lived in a glebe share house where he had written on the brick wall, "Long live the untrammelled dynamic of the universal dialectic." He was a glebe Marxist lentilist. All that Marx during the day and all those lentils at night. I've never been able to look another lentil in the face since glebe in the 1960s, much less put one in my face. Thank you. I was a dag of debating and union night. He was a front lawn warrior. Member of the Labour Party, had a long hair, a hippie. He had long hair then, now gone. I had hair then, now gone. But he was a hippie and a Marxist and a revolutionary. There was a whiff of danger and a blast of the revolution. Radical commitment. So, now here we are, 50 years on, our paths keep crossing. I think throughout his life he's maintained this interest in economics, in history, in social movement, in justice, and a commitment to Australia's engagements with Asia, which is what this book is about. Let me tell you something about the book. It seems to me it's beautifully symmetrical and structured. There are 29 short stories or paragraphs, and there are first 13 that lead up to the midpoint, then a middle 3, then a final 13. I discerned in a symmetry that perhaps the writer did not know himself. The first 13 introduce Russell's life in chronological stages and a range of themes: childhood, university, first travels in Southeast Asia, and the first times in Bali. It's fascinating. He's a Coogee boy. A boy, yes, good on Coogee. It all starts on Coogee Beach with his granddad Sid in the 1950s. And it's astonishing to see in how many ways even Coogee in the 1950s was entangled with various aspects of Asia, through New Guinea, through Chinese, through Japanese, many sorts of entanglements. All members of his family, they had a business making red crepe paper poppies for Armistice Day. His dad went to sea. Sid, his granddad, was involved in taking the German colonies in the First World War in New Guinea. Much of the action of these early chapters is on Coogee Beach. He used to hang around the rock pools looking for unusual specimens, and he found them. In one rock pool he met Bob Carr, and they grew up together in a Coogee childhood and friendship that they've remained friends for the rest of their lives. He was a precocious child, as you can tell from the chapters. In one quote, Sid talks about Australia taking the German colonies in New Guinea in the First World War. And Sid says, no one knows much about that. Gallipoli and the Western Front were really crook, and that's what they remember. And little Russell, 7 years old, said, but Grandad, it flagged the emergence of embryonic strategic regional engagement. It had geopolitical significance. Ladies and gentlemen, back in Fairfield, I was saying the cat sat on the mat. But in Coogee, little Russell was saying the emergence of an embryonic strategic regional engagement. He always did like a good noun phrase with at least 3 or 4 nouns in it, and a lot of geopolitical significance. I do have to mention here that this work is in part a work of creative fiction. So I think old Grandad nearly passed out when he heard that. Well, it was creative fiction. The fulcrum and midpoint are the 3 chapters of Balikpapan in regional Indonesia, thinking of the regions as distinct from the centre. So there are 13, childhood and university, 3 in Balikpapan, the midpoint, and a final 13, a series of newer themes and experiences, and drawing together of the themes as the book draws to its close. At the end, he ends up again with Sid on Coogee Beach, new context, new meanings, and new understandings. Just to mention a little bit of context that I feel that this book is located within, I think Australians have been discovering Asia and forgetting it again and then rediscovering it from the start of white civilization and before. Recent work by Adrian Vickers and Julia Martinez have shown that before white settlement in Australia, the north and west of Australia was the southern area of an Indonesian trading area. Australia was already part of Asia before white people came. But white civilization keeps forgetting this engagement and finding it again. We keep announcing Australia's Asian future, but Australia's Asian future has a long history. Australia's Asian future is part of Australia's past and now Australia's present. There have been quite a lot of prophets. This book covers 100 years, but I think back to the 1880s when William Lane, another Labour activist like young Russell here, wrote on 1888 warning about an invasion from Asia, White or Yellow, the story of the race war. But in the same year, the Reverend James Jeffreys proclaimed Australia as a home to representatives of all the world's peoples. Think of that, Peter Dutton. That was 1888. In 1908, J. Curry Ellis, a banker and advocate of free trade, delivered the Joseph Fisher Lecture at the University of Adelaide, calling for Asian languages to be taught widely in Australian universities. 1908. In the 1930s, the Australia sent its first goodwill mission to the East, and the ABC started broadcasting Japanese lessons in 1936. This is a time way back. There have been advocates of Australia and Asia for a very long time, and I see this book as being part of that very long intellectual tradition where thinkers and educators have called for more Australian entanglement with Asia. But also in our youth, in 1956, I found that The Truth wrote on this, Australia is a country of white people fringed by countries containing millions of coloured people. We belong to a civilization which is the highest the world has ever known. They belong to civilizations which are either dead or at any rate extremely decrepit. That was when we were 7 and 8 years old. That really was the dominant paradigm. He's one of these educators and thinkers who rediscovers Asia, our role in Asia, Asia's role with us, and for that to be studied by all parts. The second context I'd like to mention in it is this is partly creative fiction, though it's based on his own life, and I think of it as fitting into a tradition of writing on Asia. I remember the excitement back in 1978 when Chris Koch published The Year of Living Dangerously. Then in 1980, Blanche Delpuget published Monkeys in the Dark. 1981, Turtle Beach. Robert Drew in 1981 published A Cry in the Jungle Bar. Those authors sat down not knowing that the other had an Asia theme and started just at a particular moment to write about Australians really enmeshing themselves in Asia. But when I look at the similarity of those 4 novels, in each of those Australians go forward full of high ideals and anticipations, but in fact come home defeated, physically wounded or psychologically wounded, or in the case of the hero of the Cry in the Jungle Bar, actually dead. So I think this is a new and more mature and more realistic mood in Russell Darnley's book. The Australian doesn't go out with high hopes to Asia, gets defeated and returns partially destroyed, certainly damaged. In him, it's a much more complex engagement. It has, of course, its fears, its dangers, its sicknesses, the things he and Martina have experienced there during their various involvements, but it's a much more mature, I think, in its approach to the complexities of these enmeshments. There's much more I'd like to say about this book, but there isn't much time. One is the concern with the magic, the mystical, the unseen of the title. Like so many revolutionaries in Glebe, he had Marx beside his bed, but a copy of the Hermann Hesse novels under his pillow and a volume of Carl Jung under the mattress. Under so many of those Marxist-Lentilists of Glebe, there was a deeply mystical stream and an interest in magic. Well, most Marxists believe in magic anyway. How's the revolution ever going to come about? But with Russell, quite clearly, there's a strong mystical an interest in the magic triangles of Balinese measurement, in mystical experience, the power of dreams, the power of vision. He almost became a monk once. He has a Greek Orthodox name, Maximos. And so apart from the real radical, the committed thinking economist and social thinker concerned about injustice, besides that, and part of that, I think, is an interest with the magic, the mystical, and the unseen. But there isn't time to go into that. I urge you to get the book and to read it. There's another interesting part in chapter 27, or story 27, when he discusses the writing of this book as he's writing it with a Chinese lady in Singapore and her experiences of racism in suburban Australia. What I want to do is finish by quoting the last line of the book when he meets Sid again on Coogee Beach. God, he and Sid have been meeting on that Coogee Beach for quite a while. This time he doesn't talk about strategic geopolitical embryonic environment. He finishes with the words, "I haven't finished." Now, what good news that is. This is a good book, and there's more to come. Let's celebrate this book and look forward to the next one. Thank you very much, Russell Darnley.
think I've failed. I don't think David realised I was speaking to Sid's ghost. I wasn't a 7-year-old. Sid rematerialised, and that's how we happen to have these deep conversations. But Sid didn't get to understand anything about regional geopolitical significance and so forth. He was a simpler man. He was more concerned about life and death and making do. I just wanted to say thank you to a few people here. I won't go into great detail about this. David's already mentioned Martina Pentis, whom I shared a great deal of this period with, particularly the Indonesian section. And there are a number of other people whom I've mentioned in the forward part of this book who've been helpful, and a number of them are here today. Most long-suffering and most helpful in recent times has been my wife, Catherine, who has read the manuscript a number of times and listened to me talk through the agony of creating this book for several years. When I eventually finished the manuscript, I sent it off to the publisher, who said to me, this is a very interesting set of essays, diarised, travelogue-style essays, but no one wants to read things like that. You've got some good ideas, but they want to hear the characters tell the story, so go away and write the dialogue. So I spent 9 months writing dialogue, and what emerged was this book. So I hope you enjoy it. And what I thought I might do today is read the first of the 3 stories, the trilogy that sits in the centre of this book. I think it represents a degree of maturity in my own outlook, but it's also at an earlier point in my life when I'm trying to reconcile the myths of Asia, the myths of the Anzac, the myths of the heroic diggers in Asia. And the story itself is, but it can't stay there. As soon as one follows up those myths, one becomes entangled with all sorts of other things, and the complex reality of Asia unfolds. None the least of which is the impact of growth in the Asian region on indigenous people and on the base of natural resources, particularly the forest base. Something that's become very apparent to me living in Singapore, watching the peatlands of Sumatra and Kalimantan burn so that we can have shampoo, L'Occitane, and we can eat chocolates and so forth these days. But the story I'd like to read is Balikpapan, looking backwards and forwards. Please excuse me, my voice is really not in good shape at the moment. Balikpapan was rainy and grey. Before this journey, I had only a general awareness of its location and significance in my own country's history. Watching numerous Anzac Day marches, I knew that Australia's 7th Division, AIF, was in Balikpapan in the closing stages of World War II. There was a view that this involvement contributed little to the final defeat of Japan and was more a matter of General Douglas MacArthur sidelining the 7th Division so that United States forces might control the final assault on Japan. Cruising in an air-conditioned Land Cruiser from the airport, I mused on the Australians arriving here 44 years earlier under different circumstances. What had it been like in 1945? MacArthur's forces went on island hopping, while they, many of whom were veterans of Tobruk, Al-Alamein and Kokoda, were left to flush out pockets of Japanese resistance between Balikpapan and Samarinda. Images of young soldiers emerged in my mind, hazy black and white images gathered from grainy post-war documentaries. They stirred me. History arched towards the present in that Land Cruiser, just as it does in the sacred storytelling ritual of the Wayang. The Wayang is the mythic realm created with the shadow puppets by a master puppeteer, the Dalang. The shadows, cast upon a fine cotton screen for the audience, enact archetypal and epic events, the deeds of gods and of men. In this space of the sacred story, the Dalang, his puppets and the supporting musicians draw substance from this shadowy realm. I pondered the name of this city, Balikpapan. Balik, to turn, Papan, aboard, reminiscent of the screen that holds the puppeteer's shadows. In Wayang performances, I saw the men could walk behind the screen to see the Dalang at work and to ground the myth in present reality. If only I could turn the board around and look back. The shadows of those soldiers danced in my mind. The old projector within me flickered like the Wayang flame. As the Land Cruiser slowed before my hotel, I remembered the purpose of my journey, and the soldiers slipped from me, soft as shadows. The car door opened, and I remembered that I was there to plan a rainforest tour of Borneo, to help people connect with this beautiful place and its rich history. Checking into the hotel, I caught sight of my travelling companions sitting in armchairs off to the side in an annex. My own musings meant little in this context. We were here to develop a cultural tourism product, Walks on the Wild Side. "Hi, Paul. How are you?" I said as I approached them. "Have you been here long?" "Oh, selamat datang di Balikpapan, Russell." Paul welcomed me to Balikpapan. "We've been here an hour or so. Did you have a pleasant flight from Denpasar?" He extended his hand. Paul was a fine-looking man of dark complexion, seemingly from the south of India, but from Ambon in Indonesia's east. Rather portly, given his comfortable Jakartan lifestyle, he was fluent in English, Indonesian, Javanese and Dutch, and understood the travel industry inside out. I was looking forward to travelling and working with him. He grasped my hand warmly. "Russell, may I introduce our photographer, Henki?" I extended my hand and greeted him. "I'm pleased to meet you, Henki." "Senang," Henki replied, meaning pleased, and shook my hand without smiling. A serious man of few words, I reasoned. Paul continued. "Henki has been working with PT Puri Astronauta for a number of years. He is well travelled in Indonesia, working also with UNICEF and the Catholic Church. We're very lucky to have him." "That's good news. If this goes ahead, we need to produce a new line of brochures, itineraries and advertising materials for Walks on the Wild Side. We'll be competing with a mass market into Bali, so this product must be clearly positioned as soft adventure with elements of cultural and ecotourism." That afternoon we took a short tour of the city, but its status as an oil industry boomtown limited its tourism potential. There were some comfortable Dutch-style cottages, a small but busy downtown, and an interesting kampong or village perched on stilts out over a small section of the bay. Little remained of Balikpapan of 1945. That evening, as I waited for Paul and Henki in the bar of the hotel, I found the most tangible historic references to the 7th Division decorating the walls as a series of photographs. I reflected on how different my life had been compared with these men, but the thoughts quickly faded, and I came to think more pertinently how different my life had been compared with my two middle-class Indonesian colleagues. How could they know of April mornings, watching the old diggers marching, of the little symbolic tin hats we wore, securing a sprig of rosemary? For dinner, Paul selected the best Indonesian seafood restaurant in town. We dined on a spread of barbecued fish, prawns and chili crab, served with rice and sambal. Spoons and forks were provided, but fingers were the preferred eating utensils. Over dinner, I spoke of the images I hoped to create in the tour materials. I would like to convey a sense of the great rivers like the Mahakam, Kayan, Rajang and Kapuas as the highways, I told Paul and Henki, the vital corridors of access to the interior. People like the idea of romantic journeys into the heart of Borneo. "Yes," Paul said. "Well, we certainly will be making a journey. I want people to appreciate the magnificence of the rainforests, of the thousands of species of plants and rich ecosystems," I enthused. "Well, they will see forests and animals," Paul replied, a little tersely. I was gaining a sense that perhaps I was too effusive. Paul was very measured in his responses, and so far Henki had barely said anything to me. When Henki left the table briefly, I spoke directly with Paul. "Why is Henki so quiet, Paul?" "Oh, some Chinese Indonesians are a little reserved at first when they meet new people." "Oh, that's a relief. I thought maybe I'd committed some cultural faux pas." "Not at all, Russell," he replied. He stopped as Henki returned. I was so excited about the imminent journey into the rainforest, my thoughts drifted on into scenes of a myriad plants and animals, of complex ecosystems, optimising the life force and climaxing in total profusion. "I guess logging will be an issue for some," I said. "It's an important industry, but our focus will be on some of the unique animals and the different Dayak cultures," Paul said with an air of unexpected formality. "You will enjoy all of that, I'm sure, Russell." Henki nodded. "Betul," he said, meaning correct. I wondered about the impact of logging. I knew it wasn't well managed, but my romantic notions persisted. "We have an early start, so let's go back to the hotel," said Paul. Yes, I replied. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk on the river. Heading north out of Balikpapan on one of Borneo's few major sealed roads, my sense of romantic anticipation was tempered by a sudden blunt and rational awareness. Close to Balikpapan, settlers had established ladang, cultivated farmland, entirely replacing primary rainforest. Further along the road, the full impact of logging without any reassignment of the land to agricultural uses was soon evident. Where once there had been rainforest providing abundant cover for the Japanese, a wasteland appeared. Massive stretches of forest had been clear felled, with a litter of branches and chaotic secondary regrowth surrounding the road. This devastated land was depressing, but I reassured myself with romantic visions of the interior. Paul's reserve the night before began to make sense. He knew this would be one of my first impressions and was embarrassed by the devastation. In typically Indonesian fashion, he didn't want to offend me by dampening my fervour with reality. In the distance, a high wooden platform appeared. It looked like an observation platform surrounded by a picnic area. Beyond it were neat rows of plants set out on a grid system and extending over many hectares as far as one could see. What's that platform over there? I asked. It looks like an observation deck. That is Bukit Suharto, Paul answered. A gift from our president so that visitors can enjoy the natural beauty. Accustomed to the official television documentaries of the Suharto era, colloquially termed Cinta Negara, which meant loving the nation, I sensed that while Paul's words were in this genre, they were also subtly and deeply sarcastic. The natural beauty, Paul? I queried. Well, Russell, you can see for yourself. Can we stop for a moment, Paul? I asked, eager to have a closer look at the plantings. Yes, sure, but we can't stop for long. We must meet the riverboat by 1 p.m. and there's a museum to visit in Tenggarong. Then Paul turned to the driver and asked him to stop. Tolong berhenti di sini. We pulled in where the verge was wide and the plantings came close to the road. So what have we got here? I said aloud, not expecting an answer. This is for our enjoyment and future production, Paul answered. A species of mimosa had been planted in straight rows, alternating with rows of acacia running back from the road and over the hills. Between the rows were small plants. They looked like recently planted tube stock and were all rather similar in appearance. After a few moments, I thought I could detect about 5 different species. What was happening here was plain. Mimosa and acacia are fast-growing and hardy. They were the shade plants. The smaller plants appeared to be Dipterocarpia, that in ideal conditions would grow to become towering rainforest trees. Paul, this looks like an attempt to simulate some of the conditions found in a rainforest, I observed. Yes, it's called a managed tropical forest, he replied, tersely. Again, he used that elusive tone. I couldn't determine whether it was commentary or criticism. I reckon there are only 5 species of large rainforest trees at the most here, Paul. In a forest there'd be around 300 or more, along with ferns, palms, vines and countless other small plants. This is a very limited selection. We are grateful to our president, he answered. Now his sarcasm was undeniable. I guess we'd better get on the road again, I replied, ignoring the sarcasm. I hope the real thing is a little more complex than this. Yes, we must be grateful to President Suharto for small mercies. I wondered if I saw a flicker of a smile on Paul's face. At best, this is a managed tourist experience. At least it involved a clean-up of debris left behind from logging. In most of the clear-felled areas I saw along the road, a tinderbox waited for a firestorm. Fire in logged areas was a regular occurrence in East Kalimantan, and 10 years after this visit, the inevitable happened. The El Niño of 1997-98 exacerbated yet another outbreak that went on to burn 25% of the forests in the province. The event was so severe that even New South Wales Rural Fire Service was involved, and people in cities as far away as Singapore and Kuala Lumpur developed respiratory disorders. Bukit Suharto was soon a bad memory, as the road went on past lines of Javanese transmigrant huts surrounded by ladang, cultivated areas. No one spoke further of the devastation. A silent consensus prevailed that this was just another dramatic New Order ecological catastrophe in the making. Mounting a small rise above the village of Loajanan, the immensity of the Mahakam River confronted us. Nothing of the scale of an Amazon, but its status as a highway for the coal and timber trade was obvious. Sweeping down towards the river's edge, elegant and simple timber houses on wooden piles came into view, Then as the road twisted again, a vista of vast floating carpets of tethered hardwood logs appeared. Each bend in the road was either an encounter with beauty or a confrontation with a voracious, unsustainable harvest. How long can this logging continue before Borneo's depleted of rainforests? I asked. Paul was silent. Henke answered, the forests will grow back in 80 years. I hope, I replied, but I don't think the forests will grow back with the same biodiversity. I then added, besides, there's a problem of erosion and soil loss. I'm sure these thoughts are occupying the President's mind, said Paul, his sarcasm now fully revealed. Aboard our riverboat in Tangarong, we saw that the muddy colour of the great river was an indicator of the unseen exploitation now extending deep into the headwaters. On these lower reaches of the river, no primary rainforest was visible, though secondary regrowth was common, a few species of trees predominating. My sense of ecological despair, however, was constantly challenged by the extraordinary adaptations I saw people making to life on the river. Sononi, for example, was an impressive floating village doing a brisk trade in the darkening evening, its several rows of floating shops and warong supported by massive rainforest logs. Further on in the short equatorial twilight, proboscis and black-faced monkeys gathered in trees above the riverbanks. A brightly lit floating shop travelled swiftly upstream. Ferries and barges slipped past us as night darkened, sometimes raking us with spotlights. Indeed, the Mahakam was a major highway. I remembered Mark Twain's words, the laws of nature take precedence of all human laws. The purpose of all human laws is one, to defeat the laws of nature. So it was that facing rampant exploitation in quiet places, nature was still triumphant. Look at the fireflies along the riverbank, said Paul, in one of those dark intervals between passing riverboats. Yes, I said, so reassuring to see the beauty that remains. That's it. David spoke very eloquently about the work that many of us have been doing in attempting to elevate the consciousness of Asia, both our engagement with it out there and its presence in our own history right back to the pre-European era. And it's a very fundamental question for us to address, because so often we lose sight of this richness and this connectivity and this porosity. Whenever and I'm going to say something political here, whenever I see problems of refugees being imprisoned, I think of the porosity and I think of the impossibility of protecting these borders. Whenever I see the term border force, I'm offended.